Princess Anne had just done something inside Windsor Castle that nobody, not the palace, not the press, and certainly not Camilla, had seen coming. In a single quiet evening, a portrait that had been locked in storage for over 25 years was carried back into the room it was always meant to occupy. And the woman who had spent 2 decades ensuring it stayed hidden discovered in one devastating morning that she had absolutely no power left to reverse a single inch of it. But here is what nobody has fully explained. Yet Anne did not just witness what happened that night. She walked in afterwards and said 5 words directly to Camilla's face that no press office, no palace statement, and no institutional protocol could ever have delivered. Words that stunned the country when they got out. Words that, by every account, stunned William too. So who gave Anne the right to say them, and what had Camilla taken from her long before Diana ever entered the picture? Before we go any further, make sure you are subscribed. Stories like this one rarely end where they appear to begin, and the next chapter may completely change how you see every person involved. But none of what happened that night makes any sense at all until you understand what was sitting underneath it, and that goes back not to last week, not to Diana's death, and not even to the marriage that destroyed her. It goes back to a church in 1973, and to a young woman who sat in a pew that morning and watched the wrong person walk down the aisle because the institution she had given her life to had told her she was not allowed to be the one standing there. That woman was Anne, and the woman who took what should have been hers was Camilla. What happened between them in the 50 years that followed is the real story underneath the painting. And it starts exactly where Camilla thought she had already won. The Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor appeared on no official diary that evening. No press release had been drafted. No statement prepared in any press office inside that building. What was about to happen had been designed from the very beginning to be completed before anyone outside a handful of trusted people even knew it had started. Camilla had been scheduled for an engagement outside London that day. Someone had placed her on a train out of the city on purpose, weeks in advance, deliberately to ensure the gallery was cleared, and the thing was irreversible before she returned. The gallery itself was closed to almost everyone. A small number of personally selected staff had been allowed access, people who had been vetted, people who understood exactly what they were about to be part of, people who could be trusted not to reach for a phone before the frame was on the wall. Nobody who was not supposed to be there was there. Nobody who was supposed to be there was late. And then the portrait arrived. It had been sitting in protective wrapping in a palace storage room for over 25 years. Everyone who has described that evening keeps returning to the same detail, the way the staff carried it in. They moved slowly. The way you move with something that has already been hurt once and does not deserve to be hurt again. Princess Anne was standing in that room. Nothing in William's plan required her to be there. The legal preparation had taken months. The curators had everything they needed. The historical precedent had been checked and rechecked until no one on earth could challenge a single step of it. She could have stayed exactly where she was and read about it the following morning like everyone else. She came anyway. She had waited 50 years, and she was going to see it with her own eyes. The wrapping came off slowly, and for the first time in over 2 decades, Diana's portrait was fully visible inside the walls of Windsor Castle, placed directly beside the late Queen Elizabeth. 2 women, side by side. One who had reigned for 70 years. One who had never got the chance to reign at all. The room went quiet when it was done. Multiple people who were present have since described the same thing. Nobody spoke for a while. No congratulations. No speech. They stood in a closed gallery in an empty castle and looked at a painting that should never have left it. And then Anne said something, quietly, almost to herself, the way a sentence comes out when it has been sitting in someone's chest for so long it simply escapes, whether they intended it to or not. Staff standing nearby heard it clearly enough to repeat it afterwards. She said that Diana belongs here. And then she said that she always did. Not that she deserves to be here. Not that it is about time. Belongs, present tense. As though 25 years had been an administrative error that someone had finally got around to correcting. Camilla was asleep across London that night. She had no idea any of it had happened. She would find out in the morning. And what she did when she did every demand she made, every person she turned to would tell you everything about how much power she had built inside that household, and how much of it had quietly ceased to exist overnight. Camilla came back to Windsor the following morning expecting a completely normal day. A schedule, a car, a set of engagements arranged in the usual order. She walked in. She heard the news. And the reaction was immediate, not composed, not private, not managed. It was physical. She did not find somewhere quiet to process it and come back out with her face arranged correctly. She went rigid with fury right there in the corridor, in front of household staff who suddenly discovered they had somewhere urgent they needed to be. Then she started issuing demands. She wanted the portrait taken down at once. She wanted an emergency meeting arranged with William. She insisted that Charles step in on her behalf and have the matter dealt with before the day went any further. And she demanded a full account from every single member of palace staff who had been present in that gallery the night before. She wanted their names. Every one of those demands was refused. Every single one of them. Sit with the last demand for a moment, because it is the most revealing thing she asked for that morning. She was not asking for an explanation. She was not asking for a conversation. She wanted names, which is not the request of someone who simply wants a painting relocated. That is the request of someone who intends to deal with the people involved afterwards, the way she has dealt with people inside that building for 25 years when something has gone against her. The names were withheld, and then she turned to Charles. Understand what she was expecting from him before you judge what happened next. Charles had spent decades fighting for this woman. He fought the institution for her when the institution wanted nothing to do with her. He fought a public who despised her openly and made no effort to hide it. He fought the press. He fought his own sons, both of them, to their faces when they told him not to marry her. For the entirety of her time inside that family, Charles had been the one person on earth Camilla could rely on to stand up for her when no one else would. She stood in front of him, now humiliated, furious, shaking with it, and waited for him to pick up the phone and make it go away, the way he always had. He looked at her. He said nothing. He let William's decision stand. He let Anne's actions go completely unchallenged. He did not make a single call. He did not raise one objection with anyone. He chose silence, the cheapest possible option available to him, and handed his wife the bill for it. Think about what a phone call would have actually cost him. One sentence to a private secretary, and that portrait comes off the wall before lunch. He is the king. He did not do it. Palace insiders have said that in that moment, Camilla understood something she had never in her life been forced to look at directly. Charles had made his choice. He had chosen the institution. He had chosen his son. And after a lifetime of getting it wrong, he had finally chosen to honor the woman he had spent that lifetime wronging. But none of what Camilla felt that morning makes complete sense unless you understand what had been done to Diana's memory inside those walls in the years after her death, and who, exactly, had been doing it one quiet, invisible step at a time. Diana died on the 31st of August, 1997, and the world grieved in a way it had never grieved before. You remember the flowers outside the gates. You remember the crowds standing in the rain because they did not know where else to go, because they needed to be somewhere that felt connected to her, even if that somewhere was just a pavement outside a wall. The grief was real, and it was enormous, and it was completely public. On the other side of those gates, it was quieter, and a great deal uglier. Royal insiders have reported for years that among the very first concerns raised inside the palace in the hours after her death was not grief. It was property, specifically whether Diana had any crown jewelry in her possession in Paris, and how quickly it could be reclaimed. The scramble to locate it began before the British public had even been told their princess was gone. That is the detail that tells you everything about the temperature inside those walls that week. And Camilla was already moving. Not moving in that word is far too neutral for what actually happened. She began erasing. Diana had kept fresh flowers throughout the spaces she lived in, arrangements she had chosen herself, because that was the kind of personal detail she cared about. Camilla ordered them removed and burned. Not replaced. Not cleared out and left bare. Burned. There is a precise difference between throwing something away and setting fire to it, and every member of staff in that household understood exactly which one they were being instructed to do. Then the bedroom, the room where Diana had slept, held her boys, cried alone at night, written in her private journals when there was no one left to talk to. Camilla ordered it locked permanently. She had no use for the room herself. She simply made absolutely certain that no one else would ever use it either. Sealed off, not like something finished, but like something shameful. A stain you cover with furniture, rather than clean. Diana's personal belongings were boxed and relocated. And then her image began disappearing from the most prominent ceremonial spaces inside the royal residences. Not all at once, never all at once. One frame moved to a smaller room, then another to a corridor. Then, a third simply stopped being anywhere at all. By the time anyone noticed the pattern, there was nothing left to point at. That is how you erase a person from a building without ever writing a single instruction down. You do it in pieces small enough that objecting to any one of them makes you look unreasonable. And the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor, the wall reserved for the women who had shaped the modern monarchy, never received her portrait. For over 2 decades, the most beloved royal woman of her entire generation was absent from her own family's wall. Foreign heads of state walked past it. Prime ministers walked past it. Her own sons walked past it at every state occasion of their adult lives, counted the faces, and knew exactly whose was not there. But this did not begin with a wall. It did not begin with a painting or a locked bedroom or a box of belongings. It began with a letter. A private letter Diana wrote 2 years before she died, and what she put in that letter about the man she had married would change everything about the boy who eventually read it. In October of 1995, Diana wrote a private note to her solicitor, Lord Mishcon. She was not writing from a place of confusion. She was not writing from a place of paranoia. By that point, she had already lived through years of a marriage she would describe, on national television, as having 3 people in it. She had survived the public years and the private humiliations and the slow institutional withdrawal of every protection the palace had once offered her. She was writing from a place of cold, deliberate calculation, and what she put in that letter was specific enough to stop you completely. She stated that she believed her husband was planning to have her killed. She wrote about brake failure. She wrote about serious head injury. She wrote that it would leave him free to move on. She wrote that Camilla was a decoy, and that she herself was being used by the man she had married in every sense of that word. 2 years after she wrote those words, Diana died in a car crash in a tunnel in Paris. The note was handed to police after her death, and then it sat untouched in a drawer for 6 years before it finally reached Scotland Yard. 6 years. A woman writes down that she believes her husband is planning to kill her in a car. She gives it to her lawyer. She dies in a car. The lawyer hands the note to the police. And it sits for 6 years while the country holds inquests and argues about seatbelts and prince theories on every front page. Nobody has ever given a satisfying account of those 6 years. Not one. Charles was eventually questioned about the note privately at St. James's Palace as part of the inquiry that followed. And be precise about what that inquiry concluded, it looked at the note, looked at the crash, and found no evidence of any conspiracy whatsoever. That conclusion is what it is. But here is what does not change, regardless of what any inquiry concluded. Diana was frightened enough of the man she had married to put it in writing. She named specific methods. She gave it to a lawyer, and her son eventually grew up, found out it existed, and read every word of it. William did not know the full contents for years. When he finally understood what his mother had been writing down in the last 2 years of her life, and then turned around and looked at what had been done to her memory inside the palace walls, after her death, something inside him hardened completely. It has never softened since. Not once. He was 16 when he first broke. He pulled aside someone close to him and let all of it out at once. He said Camilla had got her claws into his father and never let go for a single instant. He said that was the reason his mother was dead, driven out of her own family, stripped of her protection, pushed further and further out until there was nobody left standing around her. She ended up alone in a Paris tunnel in the middle of the night. A 16-year-old boy said those words about the woman who was by then living in his mother's home. And then, he carried every single one of them quietly, without repeating them to anyone who mattered for the next 25 years. People underestimate William, and I think they underestimate him because he is so extraordinarily good at being pleasant in a receiving line. He shakes the hand correctly. He says the right thing at the right moment. He holds his face completely still in rooms where most people would not last 30 seconds without flinching. And because he does all of that so well, so consistently, for so many years, people look at him and see composure. What they are actually looking at is patience. And there is a very significant difference between the two. He did not storm into a gallery with a painting under his arm. He did not make a scene, issue a statement, or give a single interview about his intentions. What he did was take meetings with curators, with historians, with the people who manage portrait placement protocol inside royal residences. He went through the historical records on every previous placement on that wall, going back decades, so that he could point at documented precedent for every single step of what he was building toward. He made absolutely certain that every institutional rule was followed to the letter precisely, so that once the portrait was on that wall, there was no legal route on earth for anyone to challenge it or reverse it. That is not a grieving son. That is a future king who learned the rules of the institution well enough to use them as a weapon, and then waited until the moment was exactly right to use them. Now compare that to Harry. In January of 2023, Harry confirmed in print what people around that family had been saying quietly for years, that both brothers had gone to their father and pleaded with him not to marry Camilla. Both of them. He wrote about her in language that left nothing to interpretation, published it in a book that sold millions of copies in its first week, and in doing so burned his position inside that family down to the foundations. He said everything, all at once, to everyone, and absorbed every consequence that followed without flinching. William chose a completely different weapon. He chose the institution itself. He chose silence where Harry chose exposure. He chose process where Harry chose confession. He waited until he had the authority to act inside the system rather than against it, and then he moved once, cleanly, at a time entirely of his own choosing, in a way that produced no quotable statement, no photographable confrontation, and nothing that any press office in the world could spin into a story about a family in crisis. There is also this: Charles has been privately asking William, for years now, not to push Camilla aside after he is gone. The asking itself tells you everything. You do not beg for mercy from someone who does not have the capacity to be merciless. Charles knows exactly what his son is capable of. He has always known it. He has simply spent years hoping that patience and time and the grinding demands of public duty would slowly soften what hardened in that boy at 16. What happened in that gallery told him the patience had never replaced the resentment. It had only been holding it in place. But William had not carried 20 years of preparation alone. There was one other person inside that family whose wound ran even deeper than his, and hers had started long before Diana ever walked through the door. Before Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, Andrew Parker Bowles had been in a serious romantic relationship with Princess Anne. Not a passing thing. Not a rumor that someone constructed afterwards to add color to the story. They were close enough that marriage had been a genuine conversation and the royal family shut it down. Andrew was Catholic. Anne, as a senior member of the Church of England royal family, was not permitted to marry him. So she stepped aside. Because that is what she has done her entire life, every single time the institution has placed something in front of her and asked her to walk around it. She stepped aside because she had no choice in the matter at all. Within a short time, Camilla moved in. Andrew proposed, and in 1973, Princess Anne sat in the pews at their wedding and watched it happen. Sit with that image for a moment, because it is the foundation of everything that came after it. A young woman in her early 20s, sitting in a church, watching the man she had been discussing marriage with take someone else's hand at the altar. watching it happen because she had been told she was not allowed to be the one standing there, her face arranged into exactly the expression the institution required of her that afternoon. Hat on. Photographers outside. Not one word said. She did not make a scene. She has never made a scene about anything in her life. She sat through the service, attended the reception, and in over 50 years has not said one single public word about what that day cost her. That is the woman we are talking about. Not someone who lashes out, someone who files things away. And then, the woman who took him spent the following decades as a secret mistress who dismantled her brother's marriage, broke Diana in front of the entire world, and eventually walked into Buckingham Palace wearing a crown. Royal biographers have written for years that Camilla was deeply intimidated by Anne, that Anne's coldness toward her was genuinely nerve-wracking to be around, that whatever had been sitting between those two women since 1973 was never resolved and was never going to be. Understand what that coldness actually looks like in practice, because it is not shouting and it is not a feud that anyone can photograph. It is saying good morning and then saying nothing else for the remainder of the day. It is being seated correctly at every dinner for 50 years and never once being spoken to like family at any of them. It is the specific chill of someone who is never quite rude enough to give you anything worth complaining about. After the coronation in May of 2023, Anne reportedly confronted Camilla at a private luncheon, looked her directly in the eye, and said something that has been repeated around that household ever since. That she is not the queen. She is the king's wife. Anne has allegedly never bowed to her. Not once. The story goes that she sought permission from Queen Elizabeth personally to be exempt from that particular protocol, and that the Queen granted it without much of an argument. And through all of it, Anne watched Diana be erased from that wall. Year after year, occasion after occasion. She carried every piece of it the way Anne carries everything, silently, permanently, and without ever giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing it. So when the phone rang, she already knew exactly what her answer was going to be. The night before it happened, William picked up the phone and called his aunt. The call was short. Neither of them needed a long one. Both of them had been waiting a very long time for the conversation to happen at all. Anne said she could not wait to see the look on her face. She said it was long overdue. She said Diana deserved to come home. William said she comes home tomorrow. The call ended. Two people in two different buildings, both of whom had spent decades keeping their faces completely still in public rooms, both of whom had carried the same wound in completely different ways for the better part of their adult lives, agreeing in under a minute to do the one thing nobody in that household had ever dared to do. And Camilla had no idea any of it was coming. Now cut forward to the morning after. The portrait is on the wall. Every demand has been refused. Charles has said nothing, and Princess Anne walks into the room where Camilla is standing. Nothing in William's plan required this. Understand that clearly his entire operation had been built from the beginning to be silent. No press release, no confrontation, no scene that anyone could photograph or quote, or turn into a story about a family falling apart in public. He had spent months making the thing legally airtight, precisely so it would never need defending out loud. It was supposed to be finished the moment that frame went up on the wall. Anne walking into a room to say it to Camilla's face was not in the plan. Nobody scheduled it. Nobody cleared it. From everything that is understood about that morning, William found out it had happened afterwards the same way everyone else did. She came herself. No aid. No witnesses arranged in advance. Nobody present to write it down in a way that could be carefully softened later. Just Anne face to face with the woman who had burned Diana's flowers, locked her bedroom, and watched her portrait disappear from those walls for over 2 decades without once asking where it had gone. And she said 5 words. It is what Diana deserved. Past tense. Not deserves. Not is owed. Not should have had. Deserved a statement about a debt that had been outstanding for 25 years and had just been settled in full by someone else. That is the whole of it. No speech prepared for a press office. No line constructed in advance. Just the truth said out loud in a room that had been carefully silent about it for over 2 decades by a woman who had spent her entire life perfecting the art of not saying what she actually thinks. Camilla stood there and took it. because there was nothing she could do with it. Anne is the one woman she has never been able to win over, never charmed, never intimidated, never managed to make bow to her, not even after the crown went on her head. And that woman had just walked in, told her that her 25-year project had been undone because the other one deserved it, and walked back out. The story got out. Of course it did. 5 words in a closed room at Windsor Castle are worth more to a newspaper than anything a press office has ever written. And when it landed across the entire country at once. The story left the palace walls the same way all the most devastating royal stories do, not through a statement, not through a press conference, not through anything the palace communications office had prepared or approved or even been warned about. It left through the people who had been in or near that building and understood, without needing to be told, that what they had just witnessed was not a private family matter. It was history. And history of that particular kind does not stay in a corridor. By morning, it was everywhere. Television, newspapers, online commentary, international wire services, all of it moving at the same time in the same direction, with no official explanation available to slow it down or redirect it. And that absence of explanation is important, because a story that arrives without an official response expands to fill every space that response would have occupied. There was no palace line. There was no carefully worded acknowledgement. There was simply the fact of what had happened: Diana's portrait on the wall, Anne's 5 words in the corridor, and the entire country was left to form its own interpretation without anyone from inside that building telling them what to think about it. The debate that opened was not only about a painting. Commentators, royal biographers, constitutional historians, they reached for different frames and arrived at different conclusions, and none of those conclusions were wrong exactly, because the act itself was large enough to contain all of them simultaneously. Some read it as a son restoring his mother's honor. Some read it as a future king sending a precise signal about what his reign would look like. Some read it as Anne finally collecting a debt that had been outstanding since 1973. All 3 of those readings are accurate. That is what made it impossible to dismiss and impossible to contain. Internationally, the reaction was immediate and uniform in its intensity. Diana's profile was never domestically contained. Her funeral was watched by billions of people across the planet. And the correspondents who had spent years writing about Camilla's elevation now found themselves writing about her displacement inside the same institution that had elevated her. That is not a comfortable story for anyone who had spent time arguing that Camilla's position was settled and secure. Then the institutional signals began arriving. The royal family's own official communications started mentioning Diana's name with a frequency not seen in years. More references in the 2 weeks following the portrait placement than in the previous 2 years combined. That is not sentiment. That is not a coincidence. That is a signal, and signals of that kind inside an institution like this one do not travel backwards. Diana's royal patronages, the charities she had built and championed, the hospices, the AIDS wards, the landmine campaigns, causes she had thrown herself into, at a time when that level of personal commitment from a royal was genuinely unprecedented, began reappearing in official schedules. In William's diary, in Catherine's office, formally, documented, legitimate at every step, because William had made absolutely certain that every step of everything connected to this would be legitimate before it happened. The balance of power inside that household had shifted. Everyone on the payroll understood it at the same time. But the most consequential reaction to all of it was not playing out on any television screen. It was happening inside a room at Windsor, where a woman was beginning to calculate, for the first time, exactly what the rest of her life inside this family was actually going to look like. The Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor now has Diana on its wall beside Queen Elizabeth. 2 women who between them define the entire emotional heart of the modern British monarchy, one who reigned for 70 years, one who never got the chance to reign at all, standing together at last in the place where both of them always belonged. And Camilla is required to walk past it, not occasionally, not on rare ceremonial occasions that she might arrange to avoid with a scheduling conflict and a plausible excuse, regularly At every family gathering held at Windsor, at every state occasion, at every private function inside those walls, the portrait she spent over 2 decades keeping locked in a storage room is now a permanent fixed feature of the ceremonial architecture of her own home. She has no authority to move it. She has no mechanism to challenge it. She has no husband willing to make a single call on her behalf. She walks past Diana every day in a house she spent 25 years believing she had won. The first formal royal engagement after the portrait placement told the whole story without a single word being spoken aloud. That is how the royal world has always communicated the things it cannot say directly through walking order, through proximity, through the precise geometry of who stands where, and who acknowledges whom, and whose name appears first on which document. People who know how to read those signals had everything they needed from the photographs alone. Watch Anne at any public engagement now and understand that the entire country is watching her through the same lens. She does not make a scene. She never makes scenes. She stands exactly where her rank places her, says nothing that anyone can quote, and behaves with the same immaculate public composure she has maintained for the whole of her adult life. But 5 words have a very long reach, and every camera that finds her face at any royal occasion for the foreseeable future is being aimed by a photographer who already knows what she said in that corridor. Watch Catherine. The Wales office is now the operational center of the patronage restoration formally, documented, completely above challenge at every level because William made certain of that before any of it began. Catherine has spent years building her own institutional credibility with extraordinary discipline and patience, and she is now visibly, officially, associated with Diana's legacy in a way that carries real weight, not sentiment, not symbolism for its own sake. Formal royal patronage, transferred and active and pointed directly at the work Diana built from genuine feeling rather than protocol. And then the camera finds Camilla. What you see there is not grief. It is not anger, not defiance, not the particular performance of dignity that the palace communications office would have coached her toward if they had been given enough warning to coach her at all. It is something quieter and more permanent than any of those things. It is the expression of a woman who spent 50 years playing a game she believed she had already won, and who is now standing inside the prize and discovering that someone else has been quietly redecorating it around her for longer than she ever realized. The portrait cannot be moved. The words cannot be unsaid. The patronages are already transferring, and Charles made not one call to reverse any of it. What that silence confirmed about what was coming after Charles was something Camilla was only just beginning to understand the full weight of. In the weeks that followed, Camilla was quietly removed from upcoming public engagements. Not announced, not explained to the press, not addressed in any statement from any office inside that building. Simply gone from the schedule. The way things disappear in that household, when someone with the authority to make a decision has made one and has no interest in discussing it further, that is how power actually moves inside an institution like this. Not through confrontation, not through declarations, through diaries, through schedules, through the slow, silent redistribution of whose name appears where and whose no longer does. Charles has been privately asking William, for years, not to push Camilla aside after he is gone. Think carefully about what that asking actually reveals. You do not spend years quietly pleading for mercy from someone who does not have the capacity to be merciless. Charles knows exactly what his son is. He has always known it. He has spent years trying to hold back something he understood he could not ultimately stop asking for patience, asking for time, asking for one more year of careful peace inside a family that has never truly had it. And when the moment finally arrived, he went silent. That is not a husband failing to defend his wife in an argument. That is a king sitting in a room and accepting that the reckoning he had been holding back for 25 years had walked through the door, and there was nothing left in his hands to hold it back with. Come back to William at 15. Walking behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London on the 6th of September, 1997. Dark suit, face completely still, the entire planet watching. And he was not walking behind that coffin as a child who did not understand what had happened. He was a child who already knew about the affair, who had been told by his mother herself that there were 3 people in that marriage, and who had already begun the long and private process of deciding what he was going to do with everything he now knew. He made himself a promise that day, and then he did the hardest thing a furious person can ever do: nothing at all, for 25 years while he built the ground underneath it, so carefully, so patiently, so completely without visible anger, that nobody on earth could ever pull it out from under him. He shook her hand at Christmas, stood beside her in photographs, supported her elevation in public, on camera, with a straight face, and never once let her see it coming. Diana would be proud of the man her son became. That is the honest read on all of this. And I think anyone who watched that 15-year-old boy walk down the mall in 1997 and wondered what he was carrying inside that silence would agree with it. But the person who has to live inside the result is not him. Camilla spent 25 years getting that face off those walls. She burned the flowers. She locked the bedroom. She moved the portraits one frame at a time and kept the painting in the dark until she was certain it was finished and permanent and beyond anyone's ability to undo. She believed she had erased a woman from those walls. What she had actually done was give a 15-year-old boy a reason to spend the next 25 years learning exactly how to put her back.